Today's question comes from an anonymous source. We will give them the name T. So T says that they have an anxiety and identity issue with their recent belt promotion. So they got promoted to purple belt and they feel like they're not deserving or ready for it. And they're having a struggle with the, timeless old issue of imposter syndrome. And so they send me the message and asking me maybe ideas on how to deal with it or how to interpret it and my thoughts on it. So T, thank you for the question. And this is interesting. So I think that the two belts that give people the most anxiety, the most common as far as with this imposter syndrome situation is purple belt and black belt. It was that way for me. And a lot of times when I talk to my students or when I talk to people through questions like you guys through these questions, a lot of times it's purple belt and black belt. And I think I know why that is. I'll share through my experience and then I'll also give you some ideas to chew on. Hopefully that it will help you and be useful to you in this situation. So with purple belt, I think that purple belt is one of those belts where it's like the first one where you really start to see people become at like an expert level. And a lot of times when we're white belts and we come into the gym, and we roll with purple belts are crazy good. I know that when I first started jiu-jitsu, I was training under a purple belt originally. There weren't black belts in the area. So his purple belt was his best you got, and he was good. And I remember he beat the crap out of me all over the place, and I just thought this guy was untouchable. So in a few years, when I got my purple belt, I was like, I'm not ready for this. Like, I'm not as good as this person was a few years ago. Now, he gave me the belt, and he believed in me, but again, I couldn't wrap my head around that I was as good as that person was, or I was even worthy of the rank. Because again, I just feel like it hadn't been that long since I was at like fumbling little white belt, right? Well, I went and competed like the next week or about a couple weeks after getting my belt and I won. I was like, well, maybe. And then I would travel to other gyms and roll with other purple belts and I was doing just fine, win some, lose some, but I was very competitive. And I was like, maybe I do belong here. So that was like that. And that kind of helped me believe that I belong there, right? And then black belt, very similar issue. Black belt is one of those belts where when you're a black belt, it's kind of a big deal. People can poo-poo on the belts, and they can say, oh, belts are just something you tie around your waist. Anybody that's achieved a black belt knows that's nonsense, right? Getting the rank of black belt is a big deal. It symbolizes that the time you've put into the mats. The belt itself means nothing, but it's the idea of the rank behind it. It's the idea that you have some level of mastery into this thing. I've never met a black belt who was like, belts are stupid. I mean, like they don't really necessarily care about them all the time, but getting that promotion from their coach was always kind of an important symbolic thing. I'm not saying that there's not anybody that disagrees with me here, but I'm saying more often than not, anybody that has actually achieved the thing finds it valuable. And so with black belt, a lot of times people think about black belts and they're like, oh my God, black belts, those guys are amazing. Those women, I say guys universally, those people are amazing, right? And so they think about that. And then when they get their black belt, they're like, I don't know if I'm a black belt. I know when I got my black belt, it was like that. Even though in our gym, it was kind of funny. I remember one of the black belts that I was training with, that was like one of my main training partners. I'd been a brown belt for about 3 years at this point, and I remember he was getting like ticked off in a fun way. We were having fun. It wasn't an ego issue. He was just like, damn it, this is ridiculous. I'm getting beat by a brown belt. You shouldn't be a brown belt anymore. So he got my belt. I had 4 stripes on my brown belt at the time. He comes up and wraps a 5th stripe. For anybody that doesn't know how the striping system works, generally there's no 5th stripe in jiu-jitsu. So he wraps this 5th stripe around my belt. So here, you're an honorary black belt. And I remember when I got my black belt, the coach who promoted me was kind of like, the hell's this extra stripe here for, So it was just kind of a joke because I'd gotten good to where I was beating black belts and rolling with them in the gym and I was hanging in there just fine. And then I remember I got my black belt and it was like, I'm not a black belt. There's no way I'm a black belt because those dudes are so much better. They know so much more than me, all this stuff. I competed soon after. I got my black belt, which, by the way, was kind of a weird thing to be in because I remember I'm like in the bullpen and I'm like around people who I watched a few years ago and like looked up to, like they were like amazing because they're these black belts that are competing on the highest stage. And now all of a sudden I'm wearing the same color belt as them and the same bullpen as them. It was really weird. But I did pretty well in my first few black belt tournaments. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm good. And then, I started like going to gyms and training with other black belts. I did fine. And so I was like, okay, this is in my head. This is just imposter syndrome. And it's the same thing. And this is kind of how I began to interpret imposter syndrome. And maybe this is useful to you. Anytime we do something that pushes us to the edge of our comfort zone, we start to really find out who we are, and we start to find out what we're actually capable of and what's really there, right? And I think about every time in my life where I've been pushed to that edge, I've always been unsure of myself because I'm getting into something brand new. So I don't know how it's going to end. Because, again, when we get into a position where we're comfortable, when we know the lay of the land, and we kind of know how everything's going to work out, it's very comfortable, and we can easily sort of congeal and become complacent and relaxed. The minute you could put into a new position where you don't know how it's going to end, or you don't know how things are going to work out, there's no certainty to it, it instantly gets you like, am I up for this task? Like, am I ready for this? As I've gotten older and understood that, I've come to like that feeling because when I reach that edge, it gives me a kick in the butt and I'm ready to get after it. So instead of me like feeling bad about it or feeling like I'm not worthy, I look at it as every time I've got into this position where I felt unsure of myself, I didn't know how things were going to end. If I gave it my 100%, almost always, things always worked out pretty well. So again, why is this going to be different? It's just one of those things where you're in the same situation now. You're now a purple belt. You probably have a certain level of admiration for that belt compared to because the people that you came in contact with before, right? You're like, these people were really good. And now I'm here and I don't feel like I'm as good as those people. But again, your coach put you there for a reason. They promoted you for a reason. And you probably are better than what you think. Again, we're all our own worst critics. And so my thing is, think of the imposter syndrome not as like a thing like that. Think of it as just you being on the edge of your comfort zone. You're moving into a new stage of your growth, and you're going to have this both on the mats. You're going to have it off the mats. I'm sure you've had it off the mats already in your life and things like that. And when that point comes, don't look at it as like a negative thing. That nervousness, that anxiety that you have for it, don't look at it as a negative thing. Think of it as a positive. Think of it as something that's going to like sort of get you to wake up a little bit from this complacency because you're getting pushed to a new level. You're at the edge of your comfort zone. And ultimately, it's going to make you better because you're going to push yourself because you want to uphold the standard that you have in your head for what that means to be a purple belt or whatever it might be in your life that's causing that sort of imposter syndrome or that feeling of anxiety associated with being on the edge of your comfort zone. So anyway, hopefully that helps you in your situation and anybody else having that same problem. I'll talk to you guys next time.